Hey, and welcome to That Independent Streak. I'm Wendy Campbell, and you're in the right place. If you're looking for that tribe, for that conversation, the community that really kind of happens after you've lived a little bit of life, you've spent a little bit of time raising children, having a career, maybe you're shifting and you're pivoting to a new role, or maybe you just are looking for deeper conversations. I'm one of those people. I have a really hard time with surface level conversations. I'm terrible at cocktail parties, I promise. But here we can dive right in. We can get into the stories, get into the real meaning of people, and really that's where the good stuff is, right? So Patti Norris today, my guest, Wired for Wellness. She's an amazing individual. In fact, I had so much love and warmth and just enjoyment throughout the entire conversation. She is a wonderful human being, expertly noted. She's a BA RMT life coach certified Faster EFT practitioner. You want to know what that is? You got to stick around because she's going to explain it all in greater detail. But she's one of those people that really helps you if you've been suffering from little t trauma or big T trauma, or say you've had some chronic pain. You don't know what's going on. You don't understand how to get to the bottom of it. Doctors aren't helping. Sometimes you have to go a little bit deeper. And this conversation is one of those where she doesn't judge. She's one of the most beautiful people I have ever met. So I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. And I hope you listen all the way through. And I would really appreciate even more if you did listen all the way through, you did enjoy the conversation, drop me a line. Let me know how you felt about it. More importantly, definitely follow her and check out some of her assets. We've got all of that in the show notes. So make sure you check those out. You can find them on my website at thatindependentstreetpodcast.com, or you can find it on all of my socials, which are everywhere too. So definitely check that out. And without further ado, Patti Norris, Wired for Wellness. Little side note before we jump in, I am playing with AI backgrounds. They say you should definitely, vision board your life. I mean, who wouldn't want a library like this? So you may see some different ones as we go through in the next few podcasts, but definitely enjoyed this one. Patti.
Hi.
Hi, how are you today?
Doing all right, Wendy. How are you doing?
I'm fantastic. I'm excited to
Good.
speak with you. I'm glad that we've
Yes.
survived the hurricane and are now moving on into, snow season.
The hurricane, and then actually I went to Florida for a Joe Dispenza retreat. And of course, while I was there, got the flu. So I've been recovering from that since I got home. So yeah, it's just,
I hope you're
life has
better
been
today. Are you feeling better today?
yeah. I'm feeling quite a bit better. I do have a little cough drop here just in case it acts up, but no, I'm actually feeling pretty much back to myself. So grateful for that.
That's exciting. That's exciting.
Yes. Yes.
There is so many questions that are so many questions that I have to ask you, just
Yes.
because I'm so interested in this entire space. But where I like
Right.
to start is a little bit with your story, just kind of give your background and let
Sure.
everybody kind of know, who you are and how you came to be in this space.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so um, the long answer to that question, I don't like to just put it in terms of what I do. I'm a
No,
mom.
never.
I'm a mom. I'm a wife. I'm a pet mom. I'm all those things. But I've also been a practicing registered massage therapist for the better part of 30 years.
Hmm.
Um, and about 5 years ago, started transitioning out of that into the life coaching, neuroplasticity, brain retraining space. So that transition, like I think for so many people, happened out of my own struggle. Yeah, I had a sort of hitting the wall moment with my health, is the way I like to describe it. When
Hmm.
I was in my early 40s, so about 10 years ago now,
Hmm.
a little over 10 years, and I was suffering with chronic pain, anxiety, depression. I call it the trifecta.
Hmm.
I had all of it going on at the same time. At the time, it sort of felt like it dropped out of nowhere, but in hindsight, I realized it. It had been building for
Hmm.
many years, if not a good portion of my life. Really, I mean, in my patterns and my beliefs and the way I behaved and the way I thought.
Right.
Um, but yeah, it kind of came to a head. And actually, my brother was in a car accident, and up until that moment, I felt as if I was doing okay. I
Hmm.
had a lot of balls in the air, but I was keeping them in the air somewhat successfully. And then it felt like he had his accident. I went into my I need to try and fix this for him mode, which is
Hmm.
kind of my thing. And I woke up a couple of days after his accident with this sort of profound feeling of dread that had come over me, like almost overnight. And this incredible sense of anxiety that very quickly morphed into a very severe depressive episode, unlike anything I had ever experienced in my life. I mean, I was the glass half full girl all the time. So it was the straw that broke the camel's back, as they say. So that then precipitated the next probably 6, 7 years of my life were, the most profound part of that lasted for probably a number of months.
Mm-hmm.
And then I gradually, I wasn't in that heavily depressive place anymore. I wasn't like profoundly anxious. I was able to function somewhat. Um, so then it became the exploration of how am I going to become myself again, right? Because it felt kind of like I was stuck in this body that was unrecognizable to me, in this sort of emotional state that I didn't, it was totally unfamiliar to me.
Mm-hmm.
So that took, the initial form of that was I worked with a medical doctor who specialized in bioidentical hormone replacement. That was sort of the first step up the ladder
Mm-hmm.
of, pulling myself up out of the ditch.
What is that for those of us who aren't scientific?
Yeah. So this all corresponded with, excuse me, the beginning of perimenopause for me.
Okay.
So my hormones were definitely, my sex hormones were becoming really, unbalanced. I didn't understand, Wendy, at that time, how intricately connected our sex hormone status is with our stress hormone status, right? Like the endocrine system is so remarkable and it's so resilient, and it allows us to, do all of the things that we're capable of doing as humans and as women in particular. But it's a very intricate dance that all of these endocrine glands do with one another and all of those hormones do with one another. And if one part of that dance becomes unbalanced, then the rest of the system has to work really hard to make up for that, to try and keep the body in homeostasis.
Oh
Um,
gosh.
yeah, yeah. So I understand all of this quite well now, but of course at that time I didn't.
Mm-hmm.
you know, I just thought, oh, I'm just getting older. This is just what happens. And that's what a lot of us get told, right?
Right.
When we go to our medical doctors, if we start to have those sorts of challenges, particularly as women in our, late 30s, early 40s, oh, it's just part of aging. You just have to live with it. This is just the way it's going to be. So that was, like I say, that was sort of the first step.
Mm-hmm.
It did help me move the dial a little bit back into a better direction. But it was honestly, it was the next 5 years of sort of, as I say, bumbling around in the dark, trying to figure out what to do to get well, because none of the typical people that you would go to,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, I saw the naturopaths, I saw my medical doctor, I saw physiotherapists, I saw osteopaths, I saw everybody. And I would get some symptomatic relief from some of these things I was experiencing, but nothing really that I felt like I was shifting and in a positive direction and continuing to move in that direction. Right. It
Right.
was it was very sort of symptomatic. And I, for whatever reason, had a really, I'm not entirely sure what was about, but I had a resistance around using pharmaceuticals, the typical things that people would get prescribed, right? Anxiety
Right.
meds and antidepressants. And I just was sort of, if there's any other way for me to become well again, I'd rather do it that way.
Mm-hmm.
So, and at this point, I'm really grateful that that was the stand some deep part of me took.
Mm-hmm. I think sometimes that gets championed really loud, at least in my head.
Yeah,
There are times where I'm like, no, I don't want to take the pharmaceutical path.
no,
I want to do it different. But
if there's another option,
yeah,
yeah, that was my
please.
attitude, right? Yeah. So I, like I said, I sort of bumbled around in the dark. I did a lot of reading, I did a lot of studying, a lot of watching of things.
Mm-hmm.
And the first step forward was I came across a doctor by the name of John Sarno. who, I'm not sure if you've heard of Dr. Sarno, but
I haven't.
he sort of gets referred to as the sort of grandfather of the mind body movement in North America.
Okay.
So he has a beautiful, long, elaborate story. But the short version of the story is that he was a conventionally trained medical doctor who ran the Rusk Institute for Rehabilitation at the New York University Medical Center.
Okay.
So he was seeing a lot of people with chronic illness, particularly people with chronic pain,
Mm-hmm.
which was that's how it started for me.
What kind of pain were you experiencing? Because this all started during your brother's car accident, correct? So,
Well, actually, the pain had been building.
okay.
It started off as an, on again, off again sort of scenario, and then just gradually over time was more on than it was off
Mm-hmm.
until it became constant. Which was around the time that my brother's car accident happened. But
Okay.
it was primarily back pain, but I had a lot of other pain too. I had knee pain, I had headaches, I had neck pain, I had shoulder pain. I was like, yeah, I was a bit of a hot mess,
Mm-hmm.
honestly.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, yeah, I just random Google search came across this book that Dr. Sarno had written called Healing Back Pain. And it was the beginning of me really everything in my life turning in a different direction. And the basic premise that Dr. Sarno put forward was the idea that oftentimes chronic pain, and then later on, the people that took that ball and continue to run with it realized that this is the same mechanism that is in play for so many chronic health problems, but that it's often a reflection of your body basically expressing repressed emotional issues.
Okay.
Okay.
Which could cover everything. I mean, but
Right. Yeah,
also nothing.
yeah, absolutely right. So his theory was that initially he started basically with mostly talking about rage, mostly talking about anger.
Mm-hmm.
Unexpressed anger would express itself in the body as pain that becomes persistent or chronic. This was his original theory. So this little paperback book that I read put forward this theory. It also described the personality type of people that tend to be prone to these sorts of things. And, I can say with some measure of humor now that I was reading this book and thinking, oh my, it's like he wrote this book about me, right? Like I was seeing myself on almost every page of the book.
And what's the name of the book? Just one more time.
Healing Back Pain.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, very simple. But yeah, people pleasing, highly sensitive, strong social conscience, wants to be good.
Mm-hmm.
Goodist was a term that he actually coined.
Okay.
Someone who wants to be good in every aspect of their life, right? Always wants to be a good person, even if it's at their own expense,
Okay.
right? So, and I'm ticking all of these boxes, right? Oh, yeah, that sounds like me.
Sounds like all of us, but go on.
So, yeah, so this book was the beginning of me starting to understand my experience in a different way. Like, because, all these conventional things that I had tried, nothing was moving the needle on any of it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I kind of thought at that point, Wendy, what have I got to lose but to apply these principles and see what happens?
Right.
So, and basically the principles that he taught were, first of all, understand how it works. Understand that basically your brain and your nervous system are in a really dysregulated state because of all this, repressed, suppressed emotional energy that you've kind of got locked down in your body. It's like a volcano that's waiting to go off.
That sounds
Right.
terrifying, but go on.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I know, right? So first of all, understand that that's how it works,
Mm-hmm.
right? That in actual fact, even if you have persistent pain, there's a good likelihood that there's actually nothing really serious wrong with you mechanically, but that your pain has become habitual because of your nervous system being out of balance. Okay.
Okay.
So understanding that that's the mechanism is step one. Step
Mm-hmm.
two was starting to go out and live your life as normally as possible again, because in doing that, you are then telling your subconscious, yeah, we're a little bit, there's some discomfort, there's some pain, but we're still okay. So we're
Mm-hmm.
going to get up off the sofa and we're going to go out and start living again. Right.
Right.
Which in and of itself then is sending a message to the brain. No, we're okay. We're going to start living again. Right. This is a much ado about nothing kind of situation, essentially, is
Mm-hmm.
what we're trying to communicate. And then the last thing he talked about was, for some people, for a lot of people, some level of emotional discovery is probably going to be really helpful in this process. And he advocated, he said for some people that maybe have a lot of big T trauma, stuff that really never got addressed, maybe some counseling would be a good idea. But for a lot of us, it could take the form of expressive writing.
Okay.
Okay. Which is something that I took on in a pretty serious way. And I learned to do it in a way that was very, very helpful for me. So that was sort of the first part of my journey, like of starting to become well again, realizing that even though I'm really uncomfortable a lot of the time, I'm actually safe. Right.
Right. So
Yeah.
how do you like to roll it back? Because the questions
Yeah.
that would go through my mind are, okay, so you're reading this book where it's telling you, okay, you're really fine.
Yeah.
Everything you're feeling is probably a product of your head, which I can appreciate that.
Well,
But
or it
how do
starts
you,
in your head. It's not a product of your head. The pain is real.
okay.
It's a real thing, but the mechanism of what's starting the pain is not starting in your body, it's starting in your head. So that's a really important differentiation, because some people will say, well, yeah, that my, doc's telling me it's all in my head, because that would kind of imply that your pain isn't real. And
Mm-hmm.
at no point did Dr. Sarno or any of the people that do this work would they ever say the pain isn't real. The pain is absolutely real. I mean, if something knocks you down, so I had experiences where I would have such an intense wave of pain, I would become nauseous and I would pass out. Right.
Oh
Like
my
that is
God.
real. That's not something that's just happening in my
Right.
brain. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So
But the
I guess
mechanism.
the differentiation though, as you're going through this process of learning and trying to understand what's wrong with you,
Mm,
and being able to differentiate, okay, well, it started from this and my brain is
yes.
manifesting it as this.
Yes.
um I know that I'm stubborn and I'd be like, no, that's probably not it, there's nothing wrong with you,
Yes.
get your butt out there and figure it out and move on.
Right. Right.
Which
Right.
probably, is the reason that I manifest, chronic pain. But you know what I mean, like,
Yes.
how would you, at least through your process, because I'm sure you went
Mhm.
through some of that too. How
Oh,
would you kind of
absolutely.
look at that again and say, no, maybe there's something there that I need to dive into?
Well, I think, Wendy, for me, I was at the point where I had done almost everything else,
Hmm.
right? And I felt like so much of what he was teaching made sense to me that I felt like I had nothing left to lose. I was in that place, right?
Okay.
To go all in and see what happens. The interesting thing for me was that up at that point, I had been doing massage therapy and had been trained to think very biomechanically,
Hmm.
right? So I had very strong programming, sort of indoctrination around the idea that if someone's having pain, it's because of some physiological imbalance in their body. And that, I think for me, the process of breaking that pain cycle actually took a little longer than it might for some people who don't have that
Right.
level of
Block. Right.
programming,
Right.
right? So it took a little longer than for me than it does for a lot of the people that I work with, right? That are actually able to break those pain patterns relatively quickly. Um, but yeah, I think for me, there was a level of, well, I got nothing left to lose. This is where I am. Nothing else is changing it. This makes sense to me. And I guess maybe there was a little part of me, my gut was telling me, Patty, this is it. Like, this is what's going on with you,
Hmm.
and I listened to it, which I'm grateful for.
I think that's important. Like, of all the things that I've learned in my, 50 whatever years,
Mm,
listening to my intuition has probably been the strongest lesson. Like, if it feels right, it's right. If it doesn't, it's not. Period.
right. Right. Yeah. I think the older we get, maybe the smarter we get at, the better we get at listening
Yeah,
to
don't use
that.
smart. That's a
Right.
dangerous word, but yes, I understand where
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you don't listen and you then often regret that. And then you learn.
right, right, and
Right.
you end up going back to where you were in the first place. So,
Right. So there
absolutely.
we are. Right. So yeah, that for me, it was kind of like I listened to my instinct. It made sense to me and I had nothing left to lose.
Hmm.
So I just kind of went all in on it. So I did the journaling. That was really helpful. it did definitely dial the degree of pain that I was having back quite a bit. So I went from being basically non-functional, like barely able to walk up a flight of stairs,
Oof.
to being able to do a lot more than what I had been doing. So it was really, this first step was important.
And I would just kind of want to dive into that just a little bit
Yeah.
more. So when you're talking about journaling, there's
Hmm.
I think a lot of different
There
variations of
are.
how to journal.
Yes.
Some
Yes.
are I ate cereal and then I went to work and
Yeah.
cool.
No, not what I'm
Um,
talking about.
right. So do you want to dive into that a little bit just for anybody who's trying to like do the process but also on a budget?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, um, the the type of journaling that I learned to do was essentially really giving my and it wasn't exclusive to my inner child, but definitely at times my inner child, all the parts of me that maybe I had been denying,
Hmm.
I guess some people use the language of shadow parts or whatever. I was giving those parts of my a voice, and I was letting them really let it rip. So this was not the type of writing I would ever want anyone to see.
Right.
It was very raw and very almost primitive. It was one big run-on sentence. It was often used a lot of bad language, which is not how I talk when I'm, you know, communicating with people, generally speaking.
Right. As an
So,
adult.
so it was a way to really, I mean, I was raised in an environment where I wasn't really allowed to be angry. Right.
Hmm.
So I had to learn how to express that kind of energy. And I didn't want to do it. I mean, initially, once I started to play around with the idea that maybe that was the problem, that I had all this repressed anger that I wasn't allowing to come up, I went from sort of being a bit of a martyr and not expressing any of that to 180 degrees. And I think my husband was kind of like, what is happening here? Like, who are you? And could you bring my wife back, please?
Well, I'm sure it's a
Right.
huge emotional journey to dive into that and then recognize because I think, sometimes when you really get into the work of it, right, you start bringing up things that you weren't expecting either.
Absolutely.
And then you have to
Absolutely, you
deal with
do.
this demon child that you've created, but it's you. And so
Yeah.
that thought process of like managing it, but also trying to work through it so that you can you can, I guess, grow with it. But you know what I mean? Like I think when you're talking about writing and writing freely, what kind
Hmm.
of questions are you asking yourself? What kind of things are you prompting
Yeah.
yourself
Good.
with?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, one of my favorite prompts, and I've played around with this a lot, right, over the years, but I think the one that I've landed on that is most universally helpful to me, because this is a process that I will go back to. I mean, I've done a lot of healing, and my nervous system is in a completely different state than it really ever has been before in my life.
Hmm.
But my favorite journaling prompt when I'm feeling a little off and I know I need to do some work around that is, what's happening in my life right now that I can't accept.
Mm,
Yeah.
that's a trigger.
That's
Okay.
a pretty juicy
Yeah.
one, right? So
Yeah.
what that looks like is I ask myself that question. I then step out of my 50 something year old shoes, and I
Hmm.
imagine stepping into the shoes of a 6 or 7 year old little girl who doesn't feel that she has to censor herself and isn't being encouraged to express herself, and just let it rip, right? And I'm always, quite often, I am amazed at where I end up. Like you just said, like you don't know sometimes when you open that box what's going to come out, right?
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, that's all the types of journaling I experimented with. That was the type that really ended up taking me where I needed to go to get better.
Hmm.
So for a period of time, I was doing it almost on a daily basis. So some days I would feel the need to do it, other days I wouldn't, but I would do it anyway, right? And eventually it really had a positive impact on my pain levels.
That's really
It did.
interesting.
It
But are there certain I'm actually just really so fascinated by how the human body works. So
is. Yeah.
When you say there were times where you started realizing that your body was feeling better, were there
Hmm.
certain things that you were working through where like some things worked better, where some things didn't? Or was it just the matter of constant attention to it?
Well, I think what I noticed was, and it wasn't a day-to-day thing necessarily, although there were times when I would sit down in some pretty severe pain and get up 40 minutes later and the pain was 80% better. That
Hmm.
did happen. Yeah. Which was always amazing to me. And,
Hmm.
such a testament to how much our nervous system is in control of so much of our experience in our bodies.
Right.
But bigger picture, it was more of a slow burn over a period of a number of months. I just started to realize, wow, a couple months ago, the obvious example that comes to mind for me is I was helping my husband move wood. And
Hmm.
that was something I wouldn't have even been able to consider, a couple of months previous to that. Now, I wasn't moving wood for 8 hours, but I was able to move wood.
Hmm.
And if I felt some discomfort, it didn't build into this whole, oh, I got to go in and lay down and use the heating pad and take the ibuprofen. And like, it didn't move into that. It was just, oh, I'm a little uncomfortable. Maybe I need to rest and then come back out and do a little bit more later. But I was able to stay really calm about the whole thing. And so I started to trust my body more,
Hmm.
really, is what was happening. And it was less reactive, right? I also started to experience a decrease in my allergy symptoms, right? As my nervous system started to get
That's a
healthier and more
nice one.
regulated.
Right.
So, really, everything about my health started to improve in terms of those sorts of things like pain, allergy symptoms, food sensitivities,
Were you
all of
changing
that.
anything else? Like you mentioned food, but were you changing your diet at all, or were you pretty
No, not
much
really.
okay?
Yeah, I mean, my diet, I wouldn't say it was 100% clean, but it wasn't bad either. So,
Hmm.
no, I didn't really make a lot of changes in regards to that. It was really just in the initial stages of me becoming well again. It was this sort of dumping out of all of this stuff that I had been denying and repressing for so long that helped my nervous system start to turn the corner.
Hmm.
So that was sort of the first stage. And then the second stage,
Right.
yeah, took the form of me learning about neuroplasticity, which is really when everything about my life started to change at a pretty rapid speed for the better.
This is where things get really interesting too.
Yeah.
Neuroplasticity, just by definition, is
Mhm.
fascinating
It is.
in that we have no idea what we're capable of.
Oh, we're
So
just starting to,
yeah, just
even though
barely.
even those of us that are like, and I got, honestly, I am a pretty big, I geek out on this stuff. Like I love everything to do with neuroscience and quantum physics and all of that stuff. It's my jam, and it has
Uh-huh.
been for a number of years. So, and I mean, this is the work that I do now. I really don't do massage anymore. Now it's all this brain training work that I do with clients and this in this coaching program that I'm a part of. Yeah, but even as excited as I am about all that, as all of us that do that work are, we really are only beginning to scratch the surface of what's possible. I think it's absolutely fascinating.
So as you open the door to that, what are the
Mm,
first things? When did you, first of all, like if you were to come to me and say, okay, I work in neuroplasticity and
yes.
I'm going to help you feel better and we're going to
Right.
change some things about your life and we're going to deal
Yep.
with your childhood trauma and then
Yep.
we're going to put you in that happy place to go forward. I'd be
Uh-huh.
like, okay, cool. That sounds
Yeah.
great, but is that possible? So, um
Right.
can you break down a little bit about what neuroplasticity is and then kind of the steps for if I were to come to you, kind of
What that would look
how,
like?
yeah, what that looks like and
Yeah.
how you walk through
Right.
that?
Yeah. So I mean, by literally what it means, it's our brains are they have this innate ability to even past the age at which we traditionally would think they're capable of changing and rewiring,
Right.
that they're plastic, that they can change. So there's such a strong sort of cultural societal narrative around. I mean, most of us have used this sort of language from time to time. Oh, it's just the way I am. I'm hardwired that way. I can't change, right? And that is something that I think a lot of us, and probably lots of people, still believe, but um turns out not true, right? So that's really good news.
Right. And
It's
terrifying
really
to a
good
lot of
news.
stubborn people, but yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
probably. Well, yeah, I mean, and I think if you are someone who recognizes that maybe there are parts of your life that you would be interested in upgrading,
Mm-hmm.
then the possibility that you can do that in a way that you don't have to white knuckle it, and it doesn't have to be this constant uphill struggle
Mm-hmm.
to make those changes and have them stick, that's exciting, right? I mean, yeah,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
yeah.
I think there's a lot of conversation, at least these days, about,
Hmm.
okay, you've got options as far as changing how you're wired. You can
Yep.
go into microdosing, or you
Yep.
can go into therapy and talk it out for another 20 years. So the
Right.
idea that there's a shortcut in between those, that's kind of, like, all right.
Absolutely. All right. That's a good way to describe it, Wendy. Really. Like, I did the talk therapy for a relatively short period of time because I just realized relatively quickly that the relief it was very helpful for me in the beginning stages, because I didn't realize how shut down I was. I didn't
Right.
realize how difficult it was for me to actually verbalize to someone what I was experiencing.
Right.
So it was helpful in that regard. But relatively quickly, I started to realize that when I would go to a therapist, I'd feel better for about 15 minutes after I left the office. But then when I got back into the dirty water of my everyday life, I was right back into the same reactions, the same conditioned responses, the same behaviors. It wasn't really changing my experience very much.
Right.
And so I didn't go down that road for very long before I started looking for another option. So yeah, this neuroplasticity stuff, it's really based on this idea that you can actually rewire the neural pathways in your brain, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that you can have a different default reactions to things, right? You can change your triggers so that they're no longer triggers. Right? That's
So,
such a
and no, but I actually am envisioning this as you're talking about it. So
yeah.
my thought process though is that, okay, so we've now, let's say I come in and we work through some of these things, we
Mm,
rewire a few things. My triggers are no longer my triggers, but my personality is still wrapped around my triggers. So am I still, at least are you seeing with some of your
right.
patients
Yep.
that the trigger habit happens, or are you seeing that they recognize the trigger and then the habit falls away? I'm again
Well, no,
really
in actual
fascinated.
fact, it's neither of those things. What happens from my own personal experience is that when you rewire those triggers and it doesn't exist anymore in the same way,
Mm-hmm.
your personality sort of it changes in response to that. So I'll give you an example.
Mm-hmm.
It's always easiest to
Examples are
sort of,
good.
yeah. So from my own personal experience, when I was in my first year of university, I experienced a date rape.
I'm sorry.
And yes, it's a such a unbelievably common experience that so many of us have. Long story short, I went amnesic about it. Didn't realize it happened until about 6 months later, when there was a trigger. The fellow who did it walked into the room that I was in, and it all came flooding back. So over the next, I guess better part of 30 years or 25 years, every so often that would show itself in an obvious way.
Mm-hmm.
And then other times I realized it was showing itself in less than obvious ways, right? Because I'm now on the other side of having rewired that experience. So I can say that from some degree of certainty. But the interesting thing was when I went to do the work on that experience, to rewire the trauma of that and change what my brain was doing with that, like on a subconscious level, because that's really
Mm-hmm.
what we're dealing with here. Um, I came back from an event where I had that experience, and I was having a conversation with my husband around something that would normally have been very triggering for me, and it had nothing to do with sex. It was to do with money, actually. It's interesting. We don't realize necessarily how the fingers of these experiences kind of spread out and have impacts on all these different parts of our lives. So we were having this conversation, and he, we'd been together for a while. So he knew, like, he said, Patty, we need to talk about this. And I know you don't normally like to talk about it, but it's something we need to talk about. And I'm like, okay. So we sit down to talk about it. And normally I would become very defensive and I would shut down, and the conversation would not go very far or go in a very productive direction.
Mm-hmm.
And we're having this conversation, and I'm sort of noticing that I'm not doing that. I'm not shutting down. And it's almost like I've got this this little me over on my shoulder going, huh, look at that.
Hmm.
What's happening here? This is different. And I think my husband was noticing it too, right? Because the way I would always have been, I wasn't. I just stayed grounded. We had a conversation. I didn't shut down. I didn't turtle. And it went to a conclusion where we, we had a rational adult conversation about it. And I was kind of like, okay, I don't know what just happened here, but that was different. And the only thing that had changed in regards to us having that conversation was this work on this profound experience that I had had 30 years previously. Um, it obviously did something to change my default nervous system state, and I wasn't defensive and I wasn't shutting down. Right. And when I was having this, what would normally have been a very triggering conversation with my husband.
So I have two
Amazing.
questions about that. So
Yeah.
one, how does the process work? Like how do you do the treatment? And then
Mm-hmm.
two, when you're going through that and you're realizing that you're not triggering,
Mm-hmm.
is there I just envision this wave of relief because it's almost like, oh, thank God I don't have to deal with that thing that's been like that crow that's been on my shoulder for 30 years. He's flown away. And so now I can just take a deep breath and now we don't have to talk about it anymore. We don't have to deal with it anymore.
Well, you know what? It takes a lot of energy to carry that crow around on your shoulder all the time
Yeah.
and to settle it down whenever it gets upset. You know, you realize when you're not doing it anymore how much energy you were using to deal with that on an
Right.
ongoing basis. Yeah. So the process itself, it's one of those things that's way easier to demonstrate than it is to explain because it's very experiential.
Hmm.
But essentially, what we do is we use a process called memory reconsolidation. That's one of the things that we do in our coaching program, and that I do with my clients. Um, where we use because when we have a well, when we have any experience, but particularly the traumatic ones, the ones where there's a lot of stress-based emotion,
Hmm.
it leaves a pretty big neurological imprint in our brain, right? We have neural pathways that represent what we saw, what we felt, what we heard, what we tasted, what we smelled. All that sensory data gets stored in the brain. Um, and the experiences that have the most negative emotion, the strongest negative emotion, fear being probably your biggest one,
Hmm.
they tend to be the ones that take up the most real estate up here. Yeah. So it's because our brain's primary objective is survival above everything else, right?
Right.
So it's all survival trumps purposeful. It trumps a feeling of purpose. It trumps contentment. It trumps satisfaction and happiness. It's all about survival. That trumps everything else.
Right.
Yeah. So that explains why so much, those difficult, stressful, fear-based experiences end up taking up more real estate up here, right?
Right.
And be the basis for triggers later on in
So
our life.
when you release them, I'm just fantasizing about releasing all
Yeah,
of my
yeah.
triggers. When you release them, do you like I just imagine there's so much more space for you to remember things, to deal with things, to go learn things and experience new things where, that cloud isn't there anymore. So it's a little bit different, but it's again,
Oh,
I'm
it
fantasizing
changed.
about the
Yeah, no.
possibilities here. Don't mind
Yeah,
me.
well, it liberates a lot of energy.
Hmm.
It creates a lot of space and it liberates a lot of energy, like I said, that you're no longer using to try to navigate around your triggers. Right. I mean, we don't realize, how many we have necessarily until we start taking them out. And the analogy I love for that is, it's like we have these thorns,
Hmm.
right, that have been in our side, and we padded them up and put band-aids over them, and as we get older it just becomes more and more padded, and we're we're trying to do anything we can to avoid anybody touching that
Right.
that thorn in our side, versus let's just take the thorn out. There's an idea, right? Now that we know that we can do that.
Hmm.
Yeah, it liberates all this energy that you can then use, right, to create, sort of consciously decide, okay, what would I like to replace that with? Like, do I have things I'd like to create more of in my life, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
which has totally been my experience. All of the space that this has cleared out, all the energy that it's liberated, like cleaning up all of this stuff. I'm now have this whole new career for myself. I've been a part of this coaching program that is like starting to blow up and doing amazing things for people. It's like, wow.
Yeah,
Right? Like, yeah, 10 years ago, I was like almost disabled. And now, coming up, I'm going to be 53 in a few days. Like,
you look great.
I'm doing all these things and learning all these new things. And, it's all these, I don't know that I would have ever believed that any of that was possible, particularly at this stage of my life.
Right.
Like, yeah.
Right. That's where kind of my brain is breaking a little bit, and just thinking about, you go through, and a lot of us have childhood trauma.
Right.
I'm learning more and more about, you can have trauma from your genetic line that you carry through the birthing process, and you carry through your life.
Yep.
Okay, I can't help with that because I have no idea what that is, so I have no idea how to target that one. But
Right.
as you get older and you start realizing, okay, I need to start relaxing on some of these things. I need to start letting go of it and handling it and adulting.
Hmm.
There is a point where you start thinking about, okay, well, if I do let go of all of these things, then who am I? Where is my personality once I've
Absolutely.
let go of all of these things? And some of us are hilarious because of our childhood trauma, but others,
Hmm.
there's some things that they want to let go of. So
Absolutely.
taking
Yeah.
one for the team here. But like I just wonder, like how long is that process? Like, is there a little, I mean, and I imagine this is where you come into a lot of it too, to coach through this process.
Hmm. Yeah.
But that process of learning a little bit more about yourself than you maybe had intended to, and then
Hmm.
rebuilding who you are without that.
Right. Right. Absolutely. And I think that there's a moment for a lot of us, right? When we start to rewire some of this stuff and we realize, wow, we have created a lot of space there. We want to have, I think that's where it's really, really helpful and really, really important, I guess would be the right word for this, to have a support system, either a one-to-one coach or a program that you're in that's going to help you, because naturally your brain always wants to go back to what it knows. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Like if we create space and you don't consciously, deliberately fill that space with some more of what you do want, right? What
Right.
is you consciously would like to create more of in your life, then it's going to want to go back to what it knows. So there's a period, like there's sort of a window of opportunity where we want to make sure we're doing the right things, we're getting the right support so that we can be sure that kind of we get over the hump of that. And then we
Mm-hmm.
create this momentum in the direction of what we do want. Right. And that's where having a coach or a program or something that you can go to make sure that you sort of have the support, someone kind of holding your hand and cheering you on to make sure you stay the course.
Mm-hmm.
And for myself and the people that we're working with in our program, when they do that, like some of the things that are happening are just kind of mind blowing, right? Like,
Can you give some examples? We won't name names, but can you
yeah.
give some examples?
Well, I mean, I'm sort of the poster child for it, right? Like I say, went from being disabled to now have at the age of, well, when was I when I started that training for all this work? I guess probably about 5 years ago, late 40s. Um, totally retrained myself. Honestly, Wendy, a couple of years ago, just being able to run a Zoom call was like fear inducing for me. Like I didn't have a clue how to do any of this tech stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And now here I am producing all this content and running live calls and and I love all of it. Like I'm totally energized by it. I love helping people. I love seeing them have those light bulb moments and everything changing for them. So I'm kind of the poster child for it. But yeah, I mean, we regularly see in this work people that have maybe been struggling with depression,
Mm-hmm.
anxiety. Those are really common. Lots and
Mm-hmm.
lots of anxiety, which, if it goes on for a lot of people, turns into depression if it goes on long enough.
Right.
We see people that have been struggling with that for years or decades, that in a matter of, with the right support. excuse me, and in a matter of sometimes weeks and other times, a number, maybe 3 to 4 months,
Hmm.
totally rewire that. So they're no longer identifying as having either of those problems.
That's amazing. So
It
if
is
I, if,
amazing.
I mean, like I think of the number of people that are, that I know that are
Hmm.
either dealing with anxiety or
Hmm.
depression, or they're dealing with
Yes.
anxiety that is depression that they're calling anxiety and
Hmm.
stress, even though it's all of these things. And, even post COVID, the number of people
Hmm.
who just got to get it done. It's almost like that English mentality of, just keep going. Don't look
Hmm.
anyway, just keep
Yeah,
going, get
yeah.
your thing done.
Yep.
And
Yep.
you think about how easy it could be to fix things and at least do the work and move in the right direction. And
Hmm.
it's almost like we're trained to, just go take the quick pill and put it away for now.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, and to be fair, we just didn't know any better,
Mm.
right? We didn't know any better. I mean, I think most of us are doing the best we can
Hmm.
in any given moment with what we know to be true, right? But when we, as Maya Angelou said, when we know better, we have the opportunity to do better,
We
right?
hope. Hmm.
Yes, absolutely. Well, the opportunity is always there, whether or not we take it, whether we choose it, the opportunity is there, right? And there's so much momentum behind the neuroplasticity movement. Like it's remarkable what's happening in that space. Um, so there's just so much possibility. There's definitely times where it can feel a bit frustrating because we know how much we can help people and how profoundly so many people are suffering right now, right?
Right.
It's so rampant, and we know that there's another way, right? And I mean, I had been practicing being anxious and depressed and in chronic pain for quite a long time. I'd been gotten pretty good at it,
Hmm.
right? I had some pretty well established neural pathways around all of that. And despite that, and despite the fact that I had been conditioned around my pain anyway to believe for decades that it was biomechanical,
Hmm.
I was able to change that experience. So I no longer identify with any of it. I'm still a human. So if something that is anxiety producing happens, I can feel some anxiety,
Hmm.
but I don't get stuck in it.
I think that's fantastic.
Yeah. And if I have some pain come up, right? If my stress levels are high because there's a whole bunch of things that are happening around me that I don't have a lot of control over, and I get a little bit of pain come up in my back, I know immediately what's happening. I
Hmm.
know I need to go do some journaling. I need to go soothe myself. I need to go use the mechanisms that I know how to use. And there's actually also times when I've been able to just speak to my body and turn it off.
That's
Yeah.
fantastic power. I mean, if you think about it, like getting ownership, complete
Mm.
ownership of yourself is one super liberating because then it doesn't
Mhm.
matter what the externals are, you've got control over it. But I imagine that's pretty liberating in that just going forward, I got
Well,
this.
I'll give you an example of this. This is my favorite example of the whole being able to talk to your body and tell it, soothe it slash tell it how it's going to be. I was on vacation back in the spring in the Dominican,
Hmm.
and it's the first time because of COVID I had been anywhere in several years. And my husband and I were having a conversation around some lifestyle changes that we were feeling like we need to make. Um, I have a lot of animals that I adore, but I think I could make an argument I probably have too many because it's a
Hmm.
lot to look after.
Hmm.
So we were kind of acknowledging that in the conversation we were having, and it was kind of bringing up some emotion for me. So towards the end of the conversation, I stood up from the surface I was sitting on when we were talking about it, and I hadn't felt anything in my back for weeks. I stood up, slam, just like somebody stuck a knife in my back on the heels of this very emotionally charged conversation. So I immediately kind of was like, wow. It wasn't really a fear response. It was more of a, wow, look at that. Like I turned to
Hmm.
my husband and I said, look at that. We're just talking about this thing that's very triggering for me. And my body immediately just started screaming at me. Right. So I looked at him and I kind of was like, okay, I started to laugh and I took a few deep breaths and walked around the room a little bit. And the whole time, the narrative in my head was, I hear you. I know what you're trying to say to me. It's okay. We're handling it. We're going to do what we need to do. We're taking steps. We're taking action. It's all going to be okay. So you don't need to cause pain right now. This was the narrative. I just basically said some version of that on repeat for about
Right.
5 or 10 minutes as I walked around our hotel room. The pain left, didn't return.
I imagine this has to be super beneficial to your relationship. And
Oh,
any relationship, because I think, so many
yeah, I
people are
can't.
triggered and nobody knows why. And then there's an
Right, right.
argument over what we don't know.
Oh, I can't even begin to, I don't know how you to verbalize how much my relationship has improved, and also the relationship I have with my sons. I have two young adult sons,
Hmm.
and with them as well. It's the upgrade I have received in my nervous system by doing all of this work has changed the culture in our family.
I think that's beautiful.
Yeah.
I have adult children as well.
Hmm.
So when you're going through and you're talking about your relationships, I'm curious, have you looked at your children and said, let's talk about some of the things that you're still carrying, or do you let them get to that on their own?
Both, I would say. I've had pretty open conversations with the boys about acknowledging what I was experiencing, what I have been experiencing. I've actually been able to help them understand some of what they're experiencing a little bit better. I don't do the work with them because that, let's be real, probably a lot of what they got going on goes back to things that I did.
Me.
So
It was me the whole time. I know.
so I've paid for other people that my colleagues to work with them.
Smart.
But so they have some level of understanding of how some of this stuff works, which is
Hmm.
really good. Um, and I've offered a lot of apologies. I think I was a pretty good mom, but we do the best we can with what we have at the moment.
Right.
But I know a lot more now than I did then. So there's been lots of opportunities for those sorts of conversations. And like I said, just the whole sort of culture in our family, in my immediate family, has really been upgraded because I cleaned up my stuff.
Hmm. I think
Yeah.
it's really beautiful. I think, there's so much opportunity as we learn more about the brain and more about, the spirit and how to connect and connect well. I think back to my great grandparents coming over
Hmm.
from Italy and living the hard life where they worked hard and they did the
Right.
things and they didn't talk about feelings, and they got through it and everybody's fine. We're all fine, but
Yeah.
I like the softer side of this option because it does
Uh-huh.
open for much better conversations and then a much better experience throughout everything. Um,
Right.
you
Well, I
know,
mean, when our nervous systems go from being sort of in a chronic stress state, right? Fight, flight,
mhm,
or freeze, or going in and out of those states that we're so beautifully adapted to be able to go into those states when we need to, but
mhm,
we were never designed to stay there in an ongoing way, right? That's not how our physiology was designed. So,
right,
and so much of the population walking around is stuck in some form of dysregulation, right?
right.
Yeah.
Which
And I
brings me to
mean,
my next question,
sure.
actually. So as far as anyone listening,
Hmm.
we all know that we have our moments, but if when do you typically see, or what should people look for? Like, what are the signs that, people may have and not realize that they have, that they should start seeking someone to kind of walk them through and get some kind of help? And I
Hmm.
mean, I like to eat chocolate and drink a little bit, but everybody's got like a different trigger, right? So
Right.
everybody's going to act differently with their triggers. So,
Right, right. Well, I mean, I think the obvious signs, Wendy, are, when you start to become ill in a persistent way. I mean, at that point, probably your body has likely been whispering to you for a while in some capacity that maybe you didn't hear or you didn't understand what you were hearing.
mhm,
And now it's gotten to a point where it's screaming, right? Which was totally my experience. So that's the obvious, right?
right.
But I think if you can recognize the whispers, then, as they say, you don't have to hear it scream, right? So
Mhm.
I think when we get stuck in patterns that are not sustainable in our lives, like for instance, my subconscious programming, the one that really was the backdrop for so much of the dysfunction in my life and my health problems, was this idea that it's my job to fix everything and everyone. I jokingly will say I should have come out tattooed with that on my forehead, because
I
that
feel like there's a lot of people in your situation.
yeah. Well, I mean, it was profound, right?
Mhm.
So of course, it's not possible for me to fix everything for everything and everyone. Like it's not something that's possible. But boy, I had myself convinced for 40 years that I could.
Is
And
that because you were just trying to fix your own trauma?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's going to be fed by some measure of, I mean, we all have childhood wounds, right? We all have some sort of childhood wound, and they tend to fall under, there's sort of some categories that we've
Mhm.
identified. I'm not good enough. I'm
Mhm.
not worthy. I don't belong. There's a few others, but most of the clients I've seen, myself included, the I'm not good enough thing is very profound for most people, or a lot of people.
Do you think that's where,
Mm,
and I don't mean to keep derailing you while you're in the middle of a thought
it's
process, but
okay.
do you think that's where a lot of people develop their imposter syndrome?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Yeah. I mean, that is the fuel for so many different forms of dysfunction.
Mhm.
Right. And the thing about it is it's not true. Right. I mean, I
Right.
think the little exercise I like to do with people to illustrate just how not true that is to ask them to imagine, close their eyes for a moment and just imagine a room with maybe 25 or 32-year-olds standing up at the front of the room. And you walk into this room and you see this group of these beautiful, innocent little toddlers. And if you look at all these children, is there any part of you that could look at these beautiful children and say, yeah, that one's not good enough, and that one's not good enough, and that one's not good enough? I mean,
No,
it's not
because that would
something.
make you a horrible creature. But yeah,
Right. So they're all good enough, right?
right.
They're all good enough. So now put yourself in, you're one of those 2-year-old children. How are you different than any of the others?
That's fair.
You're not. So it's programming. We have these moments, these impactful moments where someone, a parent, a person, an adult in a position of authority, a teacher, a religious leader, or it could be our siblings, or it could be friends at school when we're really young and impressionable and we have no ability to kind of think critically,
Hmm.
right? Someone says something that in that moment really rattles us, and it leaves an impression in our brain where we make a decision. Oh, well, that must mean I'm not good enough the way I am. There's something inherently wrong with me, right? And that stuff becomes stuck in there, and that it
Hmm.
becomes a subconscious program that we just keep going back to and back to and back to, and until the day we die, if we don't recognize that that's what's happening and do something to change it. Right. It's remarkable how it works.
It's
But
insane to me how that tree just kind of falls though, so you don't feel adequate, and then your kids don't feel adequate, and then their kids don't feel adequate, and then all the
Yeah.
neighborhood kids are kind of inadequate because they've all passed on this energy
Uh-huh.
of negativity. And
Right. It's society wide, right? I mean,
yeah,
it is the human
systemic.
condition. It's the human condition to have some type of, or some measure of, childhood wounding. It's not something that any of us escape. But the
Right.
beautiful thing is, once you realize that and you actually look at it critically as an adult, you get someone who can help kind of hold your hand and help you understand this, and then rewire what your brain is doing with that stuff. You're able to get past it, right?
Mhm.
You're able to see it for what it is. It's just it's an outdated story. It's not true. So I no longer have to build my life from that, right?
Right.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean,
And
that's amazing. That's empowering in such a broad stroke. It's so empowering.
yeah, everything changes, right? Everything changes in that moment. The potential for everything to change if you want to keep working on yourself and keep right? Carrying the ball down the field, as they say. In the moment that you realize that none of that stuff that you learned about yourself as a child was actually true, and you change your default mode around that, then everything in your life has the potential to change from that moment forward. Yeah.
So you said your clients typically it's, anywhere from a few sessions to a few months.
Yeah, it really just depends on the situation. It depends on because everyone has their own programming and sort of their default nervous system state. And what I can tell you, Wendy, is that when people come to this work and they genuinely want things to change and they choose to be persistent, it always works. It's because the beautiful thing about this is there's a very mechanical aspect to it. There's a very mechanical aspect when you understand how your brain and your mind actually work, then you can learn the mechanics of it. And I myself, or if people come into our coaching program where we're doing this in a programmatic sort of community supportive type of scenario, when you keep applying it consistently, you're basically you're upgrading the mechanics in your brain. You're changing the mechanics. So it's not a matter of if it will work. It's just a matter of when.
It's a nice level up.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to think through like your whole process. So someone comes to you, they've identified there's an issue.
Right.
They want to get started with you. Do you do most of your work over Zoom?
I have an in-person coaching practice as well as a virtual one. Yeah. And I am currently still seeing some clients, and I'm also sort of we're focusing really heavily on our group program just because we're finding that we're able to help more people, obviously, in a programmatic way than doing just the one-on-one work. And it's lovely there because there's starting to be this sense of community there. People are supporting one another. We get together and we do live calls several times a week where we're all there together and doing the processes together. So yeah, there's a number of different ways to go about it, but and they both work really well. It's just a matter of preference, really.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm just thinking if somebody's hesitant,
Yeah.
looking
Yeah.
at all of the questions so that
Right.
they have an excuse to just go forward and do it. Right.
Right.
So if
Right.
you're doing it
Yes.
in a group setting, obviously you can deflect to other people who can take the
Yes.
mic and do the things. But in that situation, are people feeding off of each other? How are they
Yeah, yeah,
interacting?
yeah. I mean, the program is in a format where there's an educational component where
Okay.
myself and there's two colleagues that I've done this with. One of them is a functional medicine doctor who's actually has left her functional medicine practice to just do brain training because she's finding that work was, well, even in her own experience, so impactful in her own healing, which is a pretty compelling statement for someone to walk away from their functional medicine practice to just do this work, right? Pretty
Right.
amazing. So there's her and myself and another girl who I trained with to do this, that we do this work together. So there's this educational component where we basically teach the nuts and bolts of how nervous system dysregulation makes us prone to disease. So you walk away with a really clear understanding of how all that works. And then in addition to that, we have these weekly calls where we get together on Zoom, and we do guided neuroplasticity exercises together as a group. We have a Q&A call with our functional medicine doctor, because she will also speak to if there's functional medicine aspects to something that someone is experiencing, she doesn't practice medicine, but she can give guidance.
Okay.
And how to integrate the two together, which is very unique. There's nobody else in this space that's doing that, that's offering that. So it's kind of unique. So, and then of course, all of those calls, all of these guided neuroplasticity exercises get uploaded onto the platform so that people can go and use them whenever they want. So at this point, I don't even know how many guided processes there are there of all sorts of different types. I've trained in 4 or 5 different types of modalities, and I do most of those calls. So every week, I just sort of, sometimes I'll, based on the need, I'll develop something that I think will be relevant, or other times I'll just kind of, let my intuition guide me. What do I think people need this week?
Mm-hmm.
But we do it in all kinds of different formats. We have all kinds, because everyone's nervous system and brain responds slightly differently, right, to different
Right.
processes. So we
Of
try to make
course.
sure we're giving people a cross section of things. So you're always going to be able to find something in there. And the thing about it, really, the intention there is, it's kind of a paradigm shift, right? We're stepping out of this idea of this understanding that I'm sort of a victim to my physiology and to my brain and to my past,
Mm-hmm.
into a paradigm of understanding that I actually have the capacity to rewire what my brain and my nervous system are doing and really upgrade my health. But I need to be practicing this on a regular basis, right? It's if I want to learn something new, I can't just do it once and expect it to stick, right?
Dang it. Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I mean, the triggers that when you do the work in a supported way and you kind of rewire those triggers, it's actually pretty surprising how quickly that can happen.
Mm-hmm.
And the impact of that can really actually stick with you. But if you're trying to recover from a chronic illness of any sort, then there's a level of, I need to take 15 or 20 minutes once a day, and I need to go in here and I need to listen to a guided exercise that's just going to keep bringing my nervous system back into a better state,
Mm-hmm.
a little bit every day. And the beautiful thing about it is that a vast majority of those exercises are 15 to 20 minutes. So they're not a huge outlay of time or energy. And really, they're designed to be very much plug and play. If you're having a bad day and you just want to feel better, you go and you find something and you listen to it, and pretty much guaranteed at the end of it, you're going to feel better. So it's just practicing feeling better, right? That's really what we're talking about. And every
Mm-hmm.
day we're going in and we're practicing feeling a little bit better than we did the way before, than we felt the day before. Over time, the cumulative effect of that, right, is that we're no longer the same as
Right.
we were before.
Right. I
It's
think
no
it's
different.
I think it's really fascinating. So when I was
Mhm.
younger, I had some weight issues. I was a little fluffy.
Yep. Yep.
And so my mom had given me a guided meditation, which
Uh-huh.
probably was the first time I ever had anything, outside of a prayer circle or anything like that,
Right.
that like walked me through this thought process to retrain my brain. And I think
Hmm.
that at that point I started getting really curious. So I've been curious probably my whole life
Right.
about what our brains are capable of. I've
Hmm.
always leaned on heal thyself. So the process of doing the things to get to the desired result,
Right. Right.
but being the independent, stubborn person that I am, I tend to do it a couple times and then I'm like, it's not working. I'll move on to something else.
Uh-huh.
But I think the guided is really important. And I think the oversight is really important because it keeps you on that path and keeps you, and you
Right.
could probably speak to this better, but keeps you in that space of staying very not aware, but very in the moment of it and very
I think aware
receptive
is a
to it.
great word. I think aware is a great word, right? Really, because all of this starts with awareness,
Mm-hmm.
right? It all starts with, if we want to change something about ourselves, it starts with being aware that we have something we want to change, right?
Right.
And then it becomes the awareness of, okay, so for instance, not everyone understands this. Talking about the mechanics of how all of this works. Every thought that we think, Wendy, produces a corresponding biochemical reaction in our bodies.
That's a lot.
So when we think stressful thoughts, okay, negative thoughts,
Mm-hmm.
then our bodies respond with the production of stress chemicals, adrenaline, cortisol, epinephrine, okay? So the good news here is that the opposite is also true. So when we think thoughts that are based on things that make us feel good, then we produce feel good chemicals. We produce serotonin and oxytocin and dopamine and things that make us feel good.
Mm-hmm.
So we have access to a onboard pharmacy 24/7 by where we're choosing to put our focus.
So optimism really is key.
Optimism, yeah, it's great. I mean, I'm not somebody who believes in toxic positivity. I'm not someone who believes in, because like I said, I was very much a glass half full kind of girl, and I held myself to that, to the denial of some of the difficult emotions I was feeling. So, we don't want to repress and deny all of that, but there's ways to learn to express that emotional energy and let it flow, like let some steam off of the volcano,
Mhm.
and then redirect our focus back onto something that feels better. Right? We don't need
Yep.
to, and we can have a tendency to get stuck in those stress states because, we can kind of get addicted to them.
Sure.
Right? Those
Sure.
chemicals are strong. They are powerful.
And you
And
know them, and you
yeah,
know
they're
them. They're
familiar.
familiar.
They're familiar. Right. And we can get addicted to them. So
Mhm.
being aware that that's what's happening, understanding the mechanism, and then gradually, a little bit at a time, a little bit every
Mhm.
day. Oh, wow. I find I'm going down that same rabbit hole. I've been down there a million times before. Nothing good is down there. So I'm not going to go down there again right now. I'm going to practice some sort of pattern interrupt. I'm going to use some sort of skill that I'm learning
Mhm.
to, to redirect my focus onto something that feels better. So there's very much a mechanical aspect to that, right? But it all starts with awareness, like you just said.
I think it's great. You talked a little bit
Mm,
about rape is a pretty strong feeling.
it is. Yeah.
But there are, and I don't want to dismiss that at all, but there are a lot of people who are dealing with trauma of
Hmm.
different kinds. So
Absolutely.
what other things are you seeing typically? And really the idea is, okay, if someone's hurting or someone feels like they need some sort of help,
Hmm.
to let them know that they're not alone. What kind of things are you seeing, and what kind of things are you helping with?
Well, there isn't much I haven't seen, truthfully. Trauma is a very interesting conversation. There's so much talk around it right now. We're trying to understand the impact of it. We're trying to become more informed about how to deal with it. What I think one of the most important things to kind of understand about trauma, and what I've realized through my own experience over the last 5 or 6 years, is that we all recognize sort of your big T stuff,
Mhm.
right? So violence, rape, murder, like,
Sure. Death.
right,
Mhm.
war, death. We all recognize the big T stuff. And I think most of us will kind that will stop us in our tracks, and we can sort of understand when someone else experiences it that it's going to do the same for them.
Mhm.
But we don't necessarily understand is that small t trauma can be something as simple as not having your emotional needs being met as a child. So maybe mom and dad weren't beating on you, but they weren't present. Maybe they
Mhm.
weren't emotionally intelligent enough to be able to hold space for you to have difficult emotions.
Right.
So you learned that your emotions weren't valid, they weren't important, they didn't matter, right? So I didn't have a lot of big T childhood stuff, but boy, I had a bucket load of small T stuff.
Mhm.
And the cumulative effect of that on our nervous systems, a number of small T traumas can have a very similar effect on someone's nervous system as a big T trauma can.
What about perceived trauma? So in that, I mean, mm, people are very emotional creatures. And
They can
so
be.
even something like social media where you're witnessing and you're seeing, you could take the war between Israel and Palestine right
Hmm.
now as a good
Yep.
example. There are images that you are never going to get out of your head. They're
Hmm.
they're consistent, they're intrusive because it's not necessarily that you're looking for them, but they're everywhere right now.
Hmm.
That can impact, and I think human brains are sensitive enough that we don't always
Oh, absolutely.
separate the real from the false. So like even a
Hmm.
terrifying movie where there's massive trauma, which
Hmm.
I can't watch because I'm too susceptible, but
Well,
you know what I
yeah,
mean?
no, yeah, I do.
Like how do people I mean, do you see a lot of that where people are still trying to work through things that they aren't even necessarily experiencing, but they're feeling?
Directly a part of. Yeah,
Right.
absolutely. Yeah. Well, I mean, we store that information as an image in our brain, right? Once
Hmm.
again, an image that is shocking and has a traumatizing effect on us becomes a neurological pathway,
Hmm.
right? It's all
Wow.
mechanical. So recognizing that, I mean, I think there's a few layers to what you just said there, right? And I agree. Our home has been a no news zone for the better part of 20 years.
That's smart.
because I recognized pretty early on that my nervous system couldn't tolerate that. Um, and I think so. The shorter answer to your question is that there's ways to rewire that as well.
Mm-hmm.
That's the good news. Okay. Um, but I think we also have to acknowledge that the times that we're living in right now, the technology has evolved way faster than our brains and our nervous system's capacity to deal with the technology, right?
Right.
I mean, our brains were not designed to be able to take in the level of sensory input that we're getting 24/7 from our cell phones and all of our tech.
Right.
Um, we were designed to be able to cope with what happens within our immediate environment or in our communities, right?
Our
And
community of 100. Yes.
right, from a physiological evolutionary perspective, from a biological perspective, that's really what we evolved to be able to handle,
Mm-hmm.
not knowing in real time every heinous thing that happens all around the planet every moment of the day. And
Right.
I'm not saying that I'm not trying to sound like I'm insensitive and I don't care. That's
No.
not it at all. But what I realized pretty early on, Wendy, was that because I was that girl, I was sensitive to, it was my job to fix all of it.
Mm-hmm.
So, I realized, when I was going through that depressive episode, when I was starting to come out of it, there was this understanding that I had that, Patty, if you can't get out of bed, you're not much good to anyone. If you are traumatizing yourself on a regular basis by looking for everything bad that's happening all around you, all around the world, and feeling like on some level it's your job to try and fix all of this, then you are going to be so sick you're not going to be able to get out of bed. Then you're not going to be much good to anyone.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Good.
So it is true. Right. So the way that I can try to make things better is to look after myself as well as I possibly can so that then I can be present for the people and the circumstances that I actually do have some capacity to be of assistance to. And imagine if we all kind of took more of that attitude, how things could change for the better, right?
Right. It's a
I
very
love,
healthy, responsible kind of attitude towards it.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, and I kind of love the idea that um, we fill ourselves up so full with compassion and understanding and empathy and love for ourselves that it overflows out of us onto those around us.
Mm-hmm.
When we do it from that place, then it's both genuine and sustainable, right? And I did it from the other place. I did it from not feeling like I was good enough, from feeling like my needs weren't really important, from my needs not even really being anywhere on my priority list. They weren't at the bottom of the list, they weren't even on the list.
They didn't know there was a list. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Right.
So I did that for years until the point where my body just went, no, we're done. If you're not smart enough, Patty, to prioritize your needs and sit your butt down on the sofa and rest for a little bit, then I'm going to do it for you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what happened. Basically, I mean, I'm simplifying it, but that is essentially what happened. I gave myself away to the point where my body just shut down.
I think that happens to so many of us though. And I think,
It
it's
does.
great that you found your path and that you are helping others now because it does speak to the level of success to that, right? But
It's
I think,
possible.
yeah, it is possible.
It's possible.
There's that apprehension, I think, especially
Hmm.
in women, and especially kind of, even in our peer group, right? Where
Right.
children are off doing their adult things.
Yes.
And here we are. Now we have to manage what's left. And that's usually us and maybe some, smaller little creatures coming on.
Hmm.
But you know what I mean? It was so I think there's the ability to forget about yourself easily. while your
Yes.
children are in the house. And then when they leave, it's that awareness of, okay, now what? Now what do I do?
Now what? I
How do I
know.
fix myself? Because I'm all I have to deal with now. And,
Right.
and it's almost like I mean, I know I want to for the sake of the next 50 years. Like, why,
Yes.
we're
Right.
evolved humans. Why not enjoy the next 50 years in a different space? And it's
Make the
beautiful that
absolute
right
best of it.
now, exactly,
Yeah.
and we're
Right.
at that point now as a human race where we are looking at the other ways to do that, to
Hmm.
to expand on it. And I think it's beautiful and well timed, and I'm glad I'm here for it.
Yeah.
But it's a
Yeah.
beautiful process. How do
It
people
is.
find you if they want to start seeking your guidance and your help?
Yeah, yeah. So,
Take
well,
notes.
the group coaching program, the website for that is just getwiredforwellness.com.
Hmm.
That's the first place I would suggest that they go.
Okay.
And because there's some really beautiful things happening over there and lots of momentum, and it's fantastic. We're so excited about what's happening there. And yeah, my personal website is just my name, pattinorris.com.
Perfect. And we'll put
Yeah.
both of those in the show notes too, so people can
Okay,
easily find
awesome.
them. But
Yeah.
are there any books that you recommend as far as getting started in this process and understanding it?
Yeah, wow. I'm a bookie. I have a pretty
I love
extensive
books.
library. So, as far as the neuroplasticity, there's not a lot of books that speak directly to that. Um, One of the authors that I often will suggest people have a look at is someone by the name of Michael Singer.
Okay.
I don't know if you know Michael Singer. He wrote something called,
Familiar.
yeah,
Hmm.
he wrote The Untethered Soul. That was one of his
Okay.
books. Um, he's sort of a spiritual, Buddhistly inclined, probably, I would say, if you were going to try to, put a label on it, teacher. But, I think he has a lot of really beautiful, wonderful ways to understand our mind,
Hmm.
um, which can be really helpful as we're starting to rewire our brain and decide, what meaning we want to give the rest of our life and what purpose we want to focus on. And I love Michael Singer. He's a great teacher. But that's the really interesting thing, Wendy, about the neuroplasticity is that there's not a huge amount of like, it's such a sort of, it's exploding, right? But there isn't a lot of really clear how to manuals out there yet
Hmm.
that are
So
obvious.
you're working on that next, right?
Well, we are actually. Yes,
Good.
absolutely. As we're producing the content for our program, we are actively writing a book
Hmm.
that will describe the process of how to actually do this.
Perfect. Well,
Yes.
I'm gonna keep an eye on you so I can see when that comes out, because I think that'd be fun. Um,
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
there anything I didn't ask you that I should have?
Oh, wow. We covered a lot of ground,
We did
actually.
cover a lot of ground.
Yeah.
It's been great. I actually just noticed how long it's been, and I was like, whoa.
Yeah. Well, I think the thing I most would like to, impart to both you and to your listeners is that, if you're struggling with some sort of persistent health problem, whether it's a mental health problem or a physical health problem, there's a very high degree of likelihood that there is a conditioned stress response, a chronic stress response that is a part of what you're experiencing. And it's absolutely possible to change that. Right. So that's the first thing I really want people to know. When I first started to understand that I didn't have to stay where I was, that there was the potential for me to have a different experience, I remember the moment, and I was like an emotional mess because I'd felt so hopeless for so long. Right. And
Hmm.
I just didn't know how I was going to change it. And all of a sudden I started to feel this sense of hope that, oh, okay, there's a different way to do this. And then, the other beautiful thing I want people to know is that as you were talking so eloquently earlier about how when we kind of release some of these identities that we've built for ourselves out of all of this dysfunction and we create that void, and then we that can feel a little unnerving because it feels unfamiliar, and I've
Hmm.
been there too. But the good thing is that in addition to getting healthier, you can also learn how to decide what you want to fill that void with. and then create all this beautiful momentum towards, like we were just saying, having the best case scenario version of the rest of your life from here forward.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it's, I just want people to feel the hope that's in that, and the sense of empowerment, right? That they can have a different experience, because it's absolutely possible. If I can, with where I was, and of all of the, the not millions, lots of people that I've worked with in the
Felt like
last
a million
5 years.
people. Yeah.
Yeah. It's been lots of hours of learning and studying, that's for sure. But yeah, I mean, I've seen these remarkable transitions, these remarkable changes, these shifts happen in these folks' lives, that were really, really down and out and feeling pretty hopeless. So, it's happening, and it's absolutely possible for it to happen for everyone, if they are interested in it and genuinely want to make those changes.
Oh, I think that's beautiful. There's so much hope and freedom in that
Yeah.
it's hard not to just embrace that and run with it. I think
Yeah,
it's great.
absolutely.
Oh, Patti, you're an amazing soul. I'm gonna have you on once a week just so I can get therapy in here too. You're fantastic.
Well, I really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you about all of this.
No, this has been amazing. We'll probably circle back here in a few more months too, and just bring you back and learn some more, because I have a feeling that you're learning while you're going, because the field is learning, and so there's always new information, which I think is great.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm so hungry for all of it. Like, I'm always, what's the next thing, right? I'm just staying on the front edge of that all the time. So I'm so passionate about it that it's not work for me to do that, right? I love it.
No, it's fascinating. I think it's great. Awesome. Well, Patti, thank you so much. I hope you have a wonderful day, but thank you so much for sharing your insights and your time with us. And
all right.
And yeah, if anybody wants to find you, we'll put all of those things on the show notes so everyone can find you quickly. But thank you.
All right. Okay. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
We'll
all right.
Again.